Dear Ma, I want to preface this by saying I love you, and it may be a while before I see you again. Janie and I celebrated 8 years together as of a few months ago, and Charles just turned 2 this fall. We had a small function with some of the other families in town. Albury has a small population, around about 200 people. Regardless, Charles was spoiled rotten. Many wooden toys was thrown his way, and he cherished them all. The town had a heart of gold. Nothing makes you feel more proud than when you can see your baby boy smile like that. And the day of the function was the happiest I'd ever seen Janie in the last 5 years. After Matthew's untimely passing, I thought I'd never see her smile again. Honestly, I thought our marriage wouldn't survive it. Janie and I's new property has been serving us well. The acreage is perfectly sized and harvests have been plentiful. I'd recently built up a shed for all my tools and a smaller, makeshift cubby for Charles to play in. Sometimes I'd catch him copying me, whether it be hammering some nails or sawing some timber. He'd often ask, through a series of assertive grunts, if he could use a real tool. He hasn't spoken yet, but if I was a betting man, I'd reckon Daddy would be the first thing out his mouth. Things have been looking up the last few months, but truth be told, we've been having issues with livestock. Over the last few weeks, I'd noticed some of our cattle had gone missing. At first, I thought some lowlife had been sneaking in at night and stealing them from right under our noses. Then I found the bodies. I'd taken the horse out by the river, which runs straight out to a large inlet. It's situated about 20 acres out from our house, just down on the south end. Sprawled up along the riverbank were about 6 of our 9 bovines. Now, you'd assume these animals had gone stupider, if that were even possible, and drowned themselves, either intentionally or not. But they had been killed. Massacred. They had been freshly killed within days of disappearing. Their innards either missing or washed up on the other side of the bank. Some of the cattle were even missing limbs. Their heads were viciously torn from their shoulders and their legs, jagged and crooked. I don't mean to upset you with the details, but I find it necessary to include them. Now, obviously, we got a gator problem. Countless times I'd seen gators pulling in small game through the river, and sometimes even coming out to chase, but I'd never seen a mass grave of this proportion, this quickly. Janie and I suffered economically for this, and we needed to replace those animals that died over time. I spent a couple of days building a makeshift fence to prevent, future incidents. Some of the local gentlemen even offered to help me out for free. Now, I insisted we paid them somehow, and they agreed that something to satisfy their hunger would do just fine. And like I said, a heart of gold. The problem, for the time being, was solved. We replaced those dead, and soon we were back in the swing of things. Charles was happy, healthy, and I found myself fairly comfortable in our lodgings. Tonight, things changed. First thing I heard was the groaning. A very shrill, painful moan was echoing its way from the pasture, and I feared the worst. A sick cow, a dying cow. I thought potentially our cattle had been caught with a plague. Maybe that's what killed them in the first place. I told Janie I'd head out, just check on them and make sure it was nothing. And she sat on her chair quietly reading to herself, Charles lay on his stomach by the fireplace. I looked at him and gave him a comical, "Listen to me, Charles. You're in charge while I'm gone." Then Janie laughed and scooped him up, saying, "So you're the man of the house now, huh?" As I left, Charles' infectious laughter was the last thing I heard before the wooden door shut. I retrieved Delilah from the stable and equipped her with a rifle just in case. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a gunslinger, but I don't miss either. It was a few minutes of trotting along, following the pained moans when I saw it. I flashed the lantern down to the grass. Our oldest and longest living cow was now horizontal, her eyes large and black, hopeless. Her stomach was split open. A large gash stretched from her sternum to her udder. An assortment of organs was spilling out from within. She shouldn't be alive. And yet she was. And she was suffering. Although I hate doing it, I know it's necessary. I jumped off Delilah, armed myself with a rifle, checked it was loaded and fired one round, putting old Betsy out of her misery. The loud bang sent waves through the brush, and the birds that were once sleeping now fled the trees and scattered the night sky. The moaning had ceased. The wings of those birds then diminished, and it was quiet once again. Now, what I'm going to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I want to remind you beforehand that everything I'm about to write is true. It happened. And I now know what killed them. I stood over the body of my dear Betsy, and I slipped the rifle back into Delilah's saddle. As I faced away from the body, I was peeking just over Delilah's neck. On the edge of the tree line were a pair of golden dots. Luminescent dots that seemed to slowly sway left and right. I couldn't make out exactly what it was. The lantern's glow blocking a clear visual that far in front of me. I hesitated for a moment and watched these eyes move ever so slightly. And then they were gone. And for a moment, I felt a sense of imminent whack. A force so great had sent me flailing across the field. Delilah's body followed close behind me. It felt like a train had barreled through and struck my very soul. I crumpled in a heap in the lengthy grass and took a moment to get my bearings. I had been terribly winded. The sheer weight of whatever had hit me had sent me at least 12 yards away. I rubbed a hand across my abdomen, and I knew I'd broken a couple of ribs, coughing up blood in the process. It took me a second, for I feared my lungs may have been punctured, but I managed to get a sharp inhale in the same moment I sat up on my buttocks. I steadied my breath and looked up to see Delilah also flat on the earth. The lantern had cracked, sending a devastating ember to the land. A steady fire began to spread, and it danced its way between us. Delilah laid there, but she, unlike myself, was unmoving. And she, unlike myself, was being cradled. Cradled by a tall, ungodly being. One with eyes I could only describe as unwavering, thoughtless, empty. with a presence so terrifying it sent Lucifer into hiding. Long, sharp claws protrude from its bony hands. One collection of claws wrapped themselves tightly around Delilah's throat, and the other rested just over her stomach. The creature's face was an amalgamation of all of your worst nightmares, both insectoid in shape and wolf-like in texture. It hunches itself over my dear horse, revealing a spiky furred crescent trailing right down to the base of its spine. Its legs are too long to sit easily beneath it. Rather, one is encroaching forward, and the other is tucked underneath its heavy mass. The monster stares vacantly forward and grips tightly onto its prey. And in one quick movement, it slides its resting hand quickly across in one. And before I can register what is happening, Delilah then meets a very familiar fate. I quickly and unsteadily find my footing, and, with the assistance of an ever-growing blaze, I spot my rifle tucked into a heap of bush. As I go to grab it, I realize that my own body is rejecting my thoughts. My right hand grasps the stock of the rifle, and my left hand dangles by my side. It appears lifeless and mangled. 3 fingers snapped back in all sorts of funny angles. I had apparently landed on my arm quite suddenly in the prior impact. Even if the rifle was loaded with a second round, I doubt I'd have the strength to lift it. So I made the next best choice. I ran for my goddamn life. I took off, making my way back to my home. Every so often I looked back, watching the beast make a meal of my dear girl. She didn't deserve that. Nobody did. The only thing that I was waiting for was a hand around my own throat, and my own guts hanging from my belly. But the monster did not chase it. It simply watched me fumble through the darkness, and I watched the flames get ever brighter, ever bigger. I watched everything Janie and I worked for slowly crumble away into ash, with a great menacing beast standing in its wake. It took me what felt like an eternity, but the adrenaline had me running circles around any Olympic runner as I finally reached the porch steps. I stopped for a moment, looked back, and caught my breath. I coughed up a few more splatters of blood, which I carefully discarded into the dirt. I didn't want Charles to see it. I held my snapped arm with my other hand and nursed it for a moment, trying to make it look as regular and normal looking as possible. The windows were dark. Janie had obviously put Charles to bed, and the fire had been snuffed out. At this point, I'm wondering, how am I going to get my family out of our dream home? We ain't got a horse no more, and the closest neighbor is a couple miles away. But that fire's ever approaching. I can still smell the smoke, but I can also taste blood. Lots of it. I know my time is ever approaching. The least I can do is get my family to safety. I carefully pushed the wooden door open. First, I thought Janie may have locked it, but it swung open willingly. The darkness was palpable. The coals of the fireplace sizzled, and a ghastly smell, was emanating from within. I called for Janie, as calmly as possible. No response. I called again. No response. Then, As I stepped forward, I slipped in something wet and gripped a shelf to balance myself. I couldn't see anything as I walked in. I reached our spare lantern, using my good hand to guide my way through our home. I tried my best to light it with the matches in my pocket. And when the room was finally lit, I saw hell for the first time. Their bodies, Ma. Mama, their bodies. No man should ever have to see what I saw. My God, Mama, it's all my fault. If I hadn't left, baby, I should have been with them. Maybe things would be different. Maybe That was but moments ago. Now I'm sitting here on a chair I built, in a shed I built, just wallowing away. I think to myself, what if I just sat here and waited? Waited for the flames to creep up the pasture, creep their way to my home, to my shed, my family. Should I just accept that this was the way it had to be? Then Charles's face flashes across my eyes. His laughter echoes in the back of my mind, and at times I swear I hear Janie whispering in my ear, just over my shoulder. In fact, I can hear her right now. At any moment I could turn around and I may just see her standing there. Maybe if I looked out the window, I'd see Charles in his cubby, singing, playing. But I was never one for fairy tales. Mama, do you remember when I was younger, and I'd almost drowned in the creek by our home? For weeks you wouldn't let me out of your sight. You'd be watching me like a hawk. And I'd ask you, Mama, why do you watch me so? You looked down at me and without a second thought you said, you'll understand when you have a family of your own. And I do. I understand. I never truly understood until tonight. And I know you'll understand why I must do what I'm about to do. I know what people are like, and I know they're gonna assume things about myself. The only thing I want you to know is that I did not do it. I did not do that to my family. I have a spare pistol. It hides away in a drawer in a desk that I built. The desk I'm writing on right now. I've loaded it with 6 bullets, Ma. 5 of those are reserved for the devil that skulks and wanders our home. If those manage to take it down, which I highly doubt, the 6th bullet is reserved for myself. And if those rounds don't take the monsters down, then I suppose it won't matter. And like I said, Ma, I don't miss. Regardless of what happens, I don't intend on getting away. And I do not intend on abandoning my family again. Until you see me again, it will be in a happier place. A better time. Myself, Janie, Charles, even little Matthew will be waiting. We'll be waiting for you. And we'll be a family again. I'm keeping this letter safe in a metal box, just in the shed. I'm hoping the flames don't take it. I'm hoping you'll be able to read this. I love you, Ma. You always looked out for me. Your son, Jeremiah.